If you heard crying in the freezing woods, would you follow it? That night, the sound stopped Paul Mendez mid-step, his breath forming soft clouds under the bitter upstate New York sky. At 68, he had grown used to silence after his wife passed. The quiet became more of a presence than a condition. But this cry pierced it, sharp, desperate. It didn't sound human, yet it echoed like grief. He stood in the middle of a sidewalk dusted with snow, the old textile mill hulking ahead in the dark, its windows shattered like tired eyes. The sound came again, higher, weaker. Something was inside. Paul hadn't entered the old mill since it shut down. It was once the lifeblood of Sheffield, back when men wore steel-toed boots and the scent of oil clung to every shirt. Now it was just a ghost with rusted ribs. But that cry, it pulled at something in him he didn't know was still awake. Irene used to call him stubborn, but never heartless. As he pushed the gate open, the screech of rusted hinges seemed to protest. Inside, the cold turned sharper, like the air didn't want to be breathed. He flicked on his flashlight. Dust floated like ash in the beam. He moved slowly past collapsed shelving and broken pallets, his boots crunching on shattered glass. The smell was thick with mold and memory. Then, under a rusted staircase, a flicker of movement. A small figure limped into the light, a cat, orange, filthy, trembling. It stared at him, eyes wide and wet, before letting out another cry. Paul's heart dropped. The sound was smaller up close, but no less urgent. The cat's back leg dragged behind it, twisted, raw. Paul knelt, unsure if it would bolt. It didn't. It just stood there, breathing hard, like it had been waiting. He didn't have gloves, but he extended a hand slowly. "Hey now," he whispered, as if trying not to scare off the moment. The cat took one step forward, then stopped. It turned its head not toward him, but toward the hallway behind. Then it cried again. Paul's eyes followed its gaze. A dark corridor stretched beyond the reach of his flashlight, the walls peeled and warped. The cat limped toward it, pausing to look back. Something in its movement said, "Follow me." And without thinking, Paul did. Each step echoed like a warning. The floor creaked beneath his boots, the air turning damp. The flashlight flickered once, then steadied. Up ahead, the cat rounded a corner. He followed and stopped. In the back room, half lit by moonlight through a broken skylight, he saw a mattress. Stained, torn, on it, a small bundle. Paul blinked. No, not a bundle. A boy. Curled tight in a threadbare coat, face half hidden by a dirty hoodie. Still, silent. Paul's voice caught in his throat. "Hey, kid," he rasped. No movement. No answer. He stepped closer, light trembling in his hand. The cat jumped onto the mattress and curled beside the boy, nuzzling his chest. Then came a cough. Shallow. Dry. Paul knelt beside them, his knee pressing into the cold concrete. The boy's skin looked pale, almost blue at the lips. His eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Paul reached for his phone, his fingers numb as he dialed 911. "There's a child," he said. "Unconscious, in the old mill." His voice cracked. "Please hurry." The operator began asking questions, but Paul couldn't take his eyes off the boy. He slipped off his coat and covered the child, gently adjusting the cat so it wouldn't be pushed aside. The animal didn't resist, it simply nestled closer. Paul could see its ribs now, the patches of missing fur, the way its sides rose and fell to fast. It looked like it hadn't eaten in days. The boy let out a faint breath, eyelids twitching again. Paul touched his forehead. "Hold on, kid," he whispered. "Help's coming." The cat meowed again, softer this time. Almost relieved. The sound of sirens in the distance cut through the air like a lifeline. Paul didn't move. He stayed crouched over them, shielding them with his body from the icy draft sneaking through the broken walls. The cat blinked slowly, its body pressed firmly against the boy's side, as if it had taken an oath to protect him. Paul's heart pounded. He couldn't stop thinking about how close he had been to ignoring that cry. How easily he might have walked past, gone home, made tea, and gone to bed never knowing. The paramedics arrived fast, their flashlights slicing through the dark like rescue itself. "Over here," Paul called, his voice rough. They descended on the boy with practiced hands, checking vitals, wrapping blankets, stabilizing. One of them motioned to lift him. The cat hissed sharply and clung to the boy's shirt. Paul stepped forward. "Take them together," he said. They stayed together. One EMT looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "Okay." We'll keep her with him, Paul exhaled. For the first time that night, he felt his body relax. As the stretcher rolled out into the night, Paul followed behind, unsure what he was doing or where he'd go next. All he knew was this: a child had been left in the dark, forgotten. And a half-dead cat had refused to let him go unnoticed. He climbed into his truck, hands still shaking, and sat there for a moment before starting the engine. Snow was falling again, soft and slow, and the air in the cab was suddenly too quiet. He looked at the mill one last time in the rearview mirror. It no longer looked abandoned. It looked like a grave someone almost didn't find. That night, sleep didn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that boy's face. Those bruised eyelids, the shape of ribs beneath a torn hoodie, and the cat so loyal, so injured, still curled against him as if love alone could keep him alive. Paul sat in his recliner, Irene's old scarf wrapped tight around his neck, and stared at nothing. But something inside him had shifted. There was no going back to before. He didn't know why yet. Only that the sound of that cry was still ringing in his chest. The hospital waiting room felt colder than the mill. Paul sat hunched in a stiff chair, jacket damp from melted snow, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles ached. A nurse came out, young and kind-eyed, and sat beside him. "He's stable," she said. "Severely dehydrated, undernourished, and he has early signs of frostbite. But he's alive." Paul exhaled, the tension slowly leaving his shoulders. "And the cat?" he asked. The nurse smiled softly. "Still curled up beside him." "Won't budge," Paul nodded. "That sounds about right." They let him see the boy, just briefly. He stood at the edge of the pediatric ICU room, the beeping of machines faint but steady. The child looked even smaller now, surrounded by wires and blankets. Whiskers, Paul had decided on the name without even thinking, was nestled against the boy's ribs, eyes half closed but alert. She looked up at Paul when he entered, then settled again. There was trust in her stillness. Not in the doctors, not in the room, but in him. He didn't say anything, just stood there for a long while, watching, remembering. The way Irene used to look when her breathing changed at night. The way her fingers trembled as she reached for his during chemo. He knew this kind of stillness, this closeness to the edge. But he also knew the sound of something refusing to give up, and it had come in the form of a cat's cry. A call no one else heard, a call that had changed everything. The social worker came later that morning, middle-aged, with tired eyes and a folder tucked beneath her arm. "We haven't been able to locate any immediate family," she said. "The boy's name is Liam, 9 years old. He was in the foster system. Ran away 3 weeks ago." Paul felt his throat tighten. "And no one looked for him," the woman sighed. "He's not the first, Mr. Mendez. It's a system full of holes." Paul said nothing. He just stared through the hospital window, the snow falling harder now, covering everything. He went home only to shower and change. The house felt foreign, smaller somehow, too quiet. He sat on the edge of his bed, looking around. Irene's reading glasses still on the nightstand. The indent in her pillow barely visible now. A memory. But something else was happening inside him. The kind of ache that wasn't grief but something older, something deeper. Regret, maybe, guilt. A sense that he'd been waiting for something without knowing what. Back at the hospital, Liam had stirred. Barely. When Paul walked in, the boy's eyes opened for a moment. Dull, unfocused, afraid. Then they shifted to Whiskers. He reached a frail hand toward her, and she pressed her head into it. "She stayed," he whispered. Paul nodded. "She did." Liam's eyes drifted back to him. "Did you hear her?" Paul's voice cracked. "I did. That seemed to be enough." The boy closed his eyes again, his hand never leaving the cat's fur. The doctors spoke cautiously. "We don't know what trauma he's been through," one of them said. "He may not talk much, or trust." "This kind of abandonment," Paul interrupted gently. "He didn't give up, neither did she. That's more than most adults I know." The doctor looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "We'll see how he does." Paul nodded too, but inside, something had already shifted. He was past watching. He was already involved. He didn't understand it fully, not yet, but Paul felt drawn to the boy in a way that wasn't just sympathy, it was deeper. He was watching his younger self, small, bruised, surviving quietly in the corners where no one looked. He remembered his own father's silences, his own childhood winters. And he remembered the moment, much later in life, when someone finally noticed him. When Irene had said, "You're not invisible. I see you," that's what this was. He saw Liam. And he wasn't going to look away. The hospital had a rule: no animals in the ICU, but the staff made an exception. "That cat is doing more for him than medicine," one nurse said. Paul stayed nearby, reading, watching, speaking in soft tones. Whiskers never left Liam's bed. She ate when he slept, purred when the machines beat. One night, Paul asked the boy, "Why her?" Liam didn't open his eyes. "She didn't leave," he murmured. Paul swallowed hard. "Neither will I." By the end of the third day, Paul was bringing hot soup in a thermos, asking the nurses about Liam's progress, and sitting with the boy for hours at a time. No one questioned it, not even Paul. He had stepped into that building looking for the source of a cry. But what he found wasn't just a boy or a cat. It was the part of himself he thought had gone quiet after Irene died. The part that could still be moved, still be needed, still choose to stay. Paul returned to the hospital earlier than usual that morning. The snow had stopped overnight, and a pale winter sun peeked through the blinds of Liam's room. The boy was awake, propped against a pillow, whiskers curled against his hip like a living shield. Paul knocked softly before entering. "Hey, kid," he said gently. Liam turned his head. His voice was soft, almost fragile. "I remember your boots," he said. "They were loud." Paul chuckled. "I'll try to be quieter next time." Liam nodded. "It's okay, you stayed." Whiskers stretched, one paw reaching up toward the boy's chin. Paul watched her movement carefully. She was limping slightly less now, but her body was still too thin to warn. He brought a small bowl of soft food, which she devoured quickly on the side table. "She doesn't eat unless I'm here," Paul explained to the nurse, who was charting quietly in the corner. "I think she's afraid he'll vanish." The nurse smiled. "So are we," she whispered, "but he's holding on." That afternoon, Paul was called into a small office with the social worker. "We need to make a decision soon," she said. "He can't stay in ICU much longer, and he doesn't have a foster placement available right now." Paul looked up. "What happens to him?" The woman hesitated. "He may be moved to a shelter, temporarily, until a home opens up." Paul stared at her. After what he's been through, her tone was calm but firm. "We don't have options, Mr. Mendez. Not unless someone steps up." Paul left that meeting in a haze. He drove without thinking, ending up at the river just outside town. It was frozen over, the ice thin and cracked. He remembered bringing Irene here once during a warmer spring. She had said, "If I ever go first, promise me you won't just drift away." He hadn't understood what she meant, until now. He stared at the water and thought about the boy in that bed. Alone. Again. And the cat that had screamed into the dark so anyone would notice. That evening, Paul sat beside Liam's bed with a heavy heart. The boy had drawn a stick figure of himself, another of Paul, and Whiskers in the middle. They were holding hands. Above them, in shaky crayon letters, "We are not alone now." Paul swallowed hard. "Hey, Liam," he said. What if you came to stay with me for a while?" The boy didn't look up. "Can Whiskers come too?" Paul nodded. "Of course. She goes where you go." Liam's eyes filled with tears. Then, "Yes." The social worker returned the next day. "Are you sure?" she asked. "This isn't just temporary, Mr. Mendez. Fostering a child means paperwork, inspections, legal obligations. Emotional ones, too." Paul met her eyes. "I know. And I'm not young. I'm not perfect. But I have a warm home, food, time, and I have love to give. That has to count for something." The woman stared at him for a moment, then nodded. "We'll start the process." They released Liam into Paul's care under emergency placement protocol. That night, as they stepped through the front door together, Liam froze in the entryway. Paul waited. The boy took a deep breath. "It smells like old books and wood," he said. Paul smiled. "That's Irene. She loved books. And fireplaces." Whiskers leapt from the carrier and immediately began exploring. Liam followed her slowly, as if unsure it was really okay to touch anything. Paul didn't rush him. In the living room, Paul had laid out clean blankets, new pajamas, and a soft bed near the heater for Whiskers. "This is your space now," he said. Liam looked at him. "You made all this," Paul nodded. Just figured you might like your own corner of the world. The boy sat down slowly on the carpet, Whiskers climbing into his lap within seconds. Paul stood nearby, unsure what to do with his hands. I never had my own corner before, Liam said. Paul sat down across from him. Well, now you do. The first few nights were restless. Liam woke often, disoriented, afraid. Paul kept the hallway light on and left his bedroom door open. Whiskers never left the boy's side, curling around his feet like a sentry. One night, Paul found him sitting by the window, eyes wide. Sometimes I feel like I'm still in that building, Liam said. I never got out. Paul knelt beside him. I know that feeling, he said. Takes a while for your body to catch up to your heart. The vet checked on Whiskers that week. She's healing faster than expected, Dr. Lang said, but she's been through a lot. Her trust is delicate. Paul nodded. So is his. The vet smiled. Funny how animals and kids often mirror each other. Maybe she show him how to recover. Paul looked at Whiskers, asleep on Liam's chest. Maybe she already is. That night, he wrote the first sentence of a journal he hadn't opened in years. Love doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it crawls out of ruin and whispers, I'm still here. The paperwork began. Background checks, home visits, long conversations about stability, responsibility, and capacity. Paul answered every question with honesty. I'm not looking to replace anyone, he told one caseworker. But I'm here. I'm steady. I don't scare easy. And he deserves someone who shows up when it's hard. Each time, the answers came easier. Each time, the reasons for doing this grew stronger. Liam began to ask questions not about what had happened, but about what would happen next. Will I go to a different house again? He asked one morning over oatmeal. Paul took a breath. Not if I can help it. The boy chewed slowly, then nodded. I used to pack my backpack every night. Just in case, Paul reached across the table, placing a gentle hand over Liam's. You don't need to do that anymore. You're not a guest here. You belong. But not everyone saw it that way. At the grocery store, an older neighbor, Mr. Darlow, gave Paul a sideways glance. He yours? He asked. Paul paused. Not by blood. But maybe by grace. Darlow snorted. Lot of trouble raising kids at your age. Paul simply smiled. Maybe, but not as much trouble as leaving one behind. The man said nothing else. But the look he gave lingered. Judgment. Paul had seen it before. This time, it didn't stick. Child Services scheduled their first full home visit. Paul cleaned every corner of the house, scrubbed grout, polished windows, even dusted the attic Irene used to read in. Liam helped, folding towels with precise corners. What happens if they don't like us? He asked. Paul knelt beside him. They'll see the truth. And the truth is we're doing something good here. Liam looked at him for a long time. Even if they don't believe it, Paul nodded. Especially then. The caseworker arrived that Friday. A kind woman named Margaret with a firm handshake and soft eyes. She walked through the house slowly, noting bookshelves, child-proof locks, the bed Paul had built from scratch for Liam. She watched Liam feed Whiskers, saw the way the cat followed him from room to room. You've built a rhythm, she said. Paul nodded. I didn't know I needed it until he was here. Margaret smiled. That's usually how it goes. But the hardest part wasn't the paperwork or inspections, it was opening himself emotionally. One evening, after Liam had gone to bed, Paul sat at the kitchen table filling out a long questionnaire. List a traumatic event in your past and how you coped. He stared at the blank line. Slowly, he wrote, I lost my wife. I stopped talking. I stopped feeling. Until a cat cried and a boy listened. He folded the page, tears threatening behind his eyes. Healing, he realized, was messy, but necessary. Liam had trouble sleeping that week. Nightmares returned. Whiskers stayed near, but her purring couldn't always keep the fear away. One night, Liam burst into Paul's room crying. Don't send me away, he sobbed. Paul pulled him into the bed, holding him tight. I won't, he whispered. I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to earn your place here. You already have it. Liam buried his face into Paul's chest. Whiskers curled at their feet. And for the first time, Paul didn't feel like he was filling a void, he felt whole. The vet offered to waive future fees for Whiskers. Consider it our way of thanking you, Dr. Lang said. You didn't just rescue them, you gave the rest of us something to believe in. Paul smiled. I don't know about that. I heard her cry. The vet placed a hand on his shoulder. That's more than most people would have done. It struck Paul then how often pain goes unnoticed, how often cries are ignored. He had done it himself for years, but not anymore. At church the following Sunday, Paul brought Liam and Whiskers. They sat in the back row, quiet and observant. After service, people came up slowly, curious, cautious, kind. An elderly woman named Ruby said, "I saw the story in the paper. That cat. She saved that boy's life." Paul looked down at Liam. "I think she saved mine, too." Ruby smiled. "Maybe God whispers through the broken things." Paul nodded. "And maybe we're finally learning how to listen." Then came the letter. Paul opened it at the mailbox, heart pounding. It was from the family court. A temporary guardianship hearing had been scheduled, a chance to make things official. He stood in the driveway holding that paper, snow flurries dancing around him, and felt something between fear and gratitude. This was real. This was happening. He walked inside, handed Liam the letter, and said, "You still want to stay?" Liam didn't hesitate. "Only if Whiskers can stay too." They began preparing for the hearing. Paul had never worn a suit since Irene's funeral, but he pulled it from the closet, brushed it clean. Liam helped shine his shoes. "You look like someone important," he said. Paul laughed. "I feel like someone finally trying to do something that matters." They practiced answers to possible questions. They talked about truth, about being afraid, about why it's okay to want to stay. Whiskers sat quietly through every conversation, as if she were listening, too. The night before the court date, Paul sat on the porch with a mug of coffee. Liam came out, wrapped in a blanket. "You nervous?" he asked. Paul nodded. "A little. Are you?" Liam shrugged. "Not really. Because I already know what family feels like. They just need to catch up." Paul smiled, pulling the blanket tighter around him. "You're wiser than most grown-ups I know." Liam leaned his head against Paul's arm. "So are you." The decision was made long before the judge entered the courtroom. It was written in the way Liam never let go of Paul's hand. In the way Whiskers sat silently in her carrier, eyes fixed on the boy. The judge asked questions. Paul answered calmly, honestly. The caseworker spoke of the transformation she'd seen. The therapist described trust forming in a child once silent. And then the judge said the words Paul never expected to hear again in his lifetime: permanent guardianship granted. The morning after the hearing felt like any other: oatmeal, orange juice, and sunlight slanting across the old kitchen table, but something in the air had changed. Paul caught himself smiling more. He noticed Liam humming under his breath as he fed Whiskers, who was now walking with barely a limp. The house, once filled with shadows and echoes of the past, now pulsed with small certainties. The scraping of cereal spoons, the thud of a school backpack, the sound of a child's laughter blooming in the hallway. Liam began sleeping through the night. The backpack he once packed daily just in case now stayed zipped in the closet. He asked for bedtime stories, something Paul hadn't expected. Not fairy tales, though. "Tell me about Irene," he said one night. Paul blinked, then sat on the edge of the bed. "She was soft but strong," he began. "She had a way of making everyone feel like they mattered, even if they didn't say much." Liam nodded, listening closely. "That's what Whiskers does," he whispered. "Maybe she learned from Irene." One Saturday morning, Paul found Liam drawing in the sunroom. It was a picture of their house, with a large cat on the roof, wings spread like an angel. "She watches us now," Liam said. Paul crouched beside him. "She's still here," he replied. "Every time you laugh. Every time I breathe without hurting." Liam reached over and placed the drawing gently on the mantel, beside Irene's photo. "Now she watches both of you," he said. Paul couldn't speak. He simply nodded and pulled the boy into a hug. Whiskers remained queen of the household. Though slower, she still ruled with a quiet authority, choosing where Liam sat, what time Paul woke, and whether or not the television could be turned on. She would still perch on the windowsill at sunset, watching the street, as if guarding the memory of that night at the mill. Paul often joined her there, sometimes with a cup of tea, sometimes with a worn notebook. He'd begun writing again, nothing polished, just reflections. Fragments of healing stitched between coffee stains and half-finished thoughts. They started a Sunday tradition, walking the perimeter of the old textile mill. Paul showed Liam where he first saw Whiskers, where she had cried out. Liam never spoke during those walks. He simply held Paul's hand and watched the broken windows, the cracked foundation, as if it were sacred ground. "She found me here," he whispered once, "but maybe she found you too." Paul placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "She definitely did. The local school called one day. They wanted to know if Liam could speak at the winter assembly. Just a few words about rescue and hope," the principal said. Paul wasn't sure. Liam still had moments of withdrawal, days where silence returned, heavy and old. But Liam agreed. "Only if Whiskers can come too." Paul explained she wasn't a therapy cat, not officially. But the school made an exception. "That cat's more than therapy," one teacher said. "She's a miracle in fur." On the day of the assembly, Liam stood on the stage, small and trembling. Paul sat in the front row, heart pounding. Whiskers sat beside Liam, her tail wrapped around his ankle. The microphone squealed once, then quieted. Liam took a breath. "Sometimes, when no one hears you, you stop trying," he said. "But she cried for me, loud enough that someone did." The room was silent. "This is my home now," he added. "And I'm not lost anymore." The applause was soft, respectful. Paul wiped his eyes. He wasn't the only one. Letters came again. From students, from parents, from strangers who had seen the story online. Some had experienced abandonment. Some had rescued animals. Others simply said, "I listened more today." Paul kept the letters in a shoebox. Liam decorated the lid with a crayon drawing of a cat standing on a rooftop, shining like the sun. "She changes people," he told Paul, just by crying once. Paul ran a hand through his hair. "She made me listen," he said, "and that changed everything." Whiskers began to slow down. Not in pain, just aging. She slept more, climbed less. Liam noticed it first. "She's getting tired," he said one evening. But not in a sad way. Paul nodded. "She's been strong for a long time." Liam pressed his cheek to her back. "She can rest now." "I'm not scared anymore." Paul watched them in the firelight and knew something sacred was unfolding quietly, without ceremony. A circle closing, a bond fulfilling its promise. One evening, while reading on the porch, Liam looked up and asked, "Did Irene ever feel afraid of dying?" Paul stared into the horizon. "Not of dying," he said. "Of being forgotten." Liam nodded slowly. Whiskers wasn't afraid of dying either. She was afraid no one would hear her. Paul felt that sentence settle deep in his chest. "And you heard her," he said. Liam smiled. "Because you did first." Winter returned to Sheffield with less cruelty than the year before. Snow fell softly, like a memory revisiting gently. Paul found comfort in the rhythm of their new life school drop-offs, slow breakfasts, quiet evenings with books and fur. Whiskers had claimed a new sleeping spot, the middle of Liam's bed, stretched across the pillow like a crown. Paul sometimes paused at the doorway just to watch them sleep, boy and cat breathing in sync, their bond wordless and complete. One Sunday morning, Liam found Paul in the garage, sanding a piece of pine wood. "What's that for?" he asked. Paul smiled. "A little bench, for the front yard. Thought it might be nice to sit together outside when spring comes." Liam nodded. "Can we put her name on it?" Paul looked up. "Whiskers." The boy nodded again. "Even if she's still here, it'll remind people." Paul put down the sander and ruffled his hair. "That's a good idea." At the vet, Dr. Lang confirmed what they already knew. Whiskers' kidneys were weakening. Age was catching up. "She's not in pain," the vet said gently. "But she's slowing down. You'll start to see her rest more." "Eat less." Liam stood silently, hand resting on Whiskers' back. "She doesn't have to fight anymore," he whispered. "She can just be." Paul watched him, this boy who once flinched at every sound, now speaking like someone twice his age. They made adjustments: softer bedding, extra hydration, more time in the sunroom. Paul rearranged the furniture to make it easier for her to reach the window. Liam insisted on keeping a journal titled Whiskers Days. He wrote small notes each evening. "She purred while I read to her. She licked my hand when I cried. She blinked slowly 3 times today." Paul read it when Liam wasn't looking. Each line felt like a love letter written in crayons. One night, during a quiet dinner, Liam asked, "What happens when someone doesn't cry loud enough?" Paul lowered his fork. "Sometimes the world misses them," he said. "Sometimes, we don't know how to listen." Liam looked down. "I think I used to cry quiet." Paul nodded. I think I used to ignore those cries, in myself. In others, Liam stood, walked around the table, and hugged him. But not anymore, he said. Now we hear them. The school invited Paul to speak during Family Appreciation Week. He resisted at first. I'm not really the type, he told the principal. But you are, she replied. You showed all of us what staying looks like. On the day of the event, Paul stood beside Liam on the auditorium stage. I'm not a hero, he began. I'm a man who heard something he couldn't ignore. A cry. And it didn't come from a person, it came from a cat. Laughter and tears filled the room. He continued, sometimes love starts small. It limps into your life on 3 legs and a broken rib. It sits beside someone who's barely breathing and refuses to leave. And if you're lucky, that love teaches you how to live again. Liam squeezed his hand, eyes locked on Whiskers resting peacefully in a carrier beside them. She didn't just save him, Paul finished. She saved me too. The applause was thunderous, but Paul only heard the purr from the floor beside him. Back home, they framed a picture of the 3 of them at the assembly, Paul in a navy sweater, Liam in a pressed white shirt, and Whiskers blinking slowly at the camera like she knew the weight of that moment. It sat on the mantel next to Irene's photo. She'd love you, Paul said one night to Liam. The boy looked up. She already does. And for a second, Paul swore he could smell Irene's favorite tea, jasmine and honey, floating in from the kitchen. Whiskers began sleeping deeper. Her eyes stayed closed longer, her steps more hesitant. One morning, Liam didn't find her on the pillow. She was under the bed, curled tight, breathing shallow. It's close, he said to Paul, not crying. She's letting go slow, so we can catch up. Paul knelt beside him, their hands touching the soft fur together. She waited long enough, Paul whispered. Now we'll carry her. They stayed there for hours, as the sun climbed higher. That night, Whiskers passed away. Quietly. No sound. No final cry. Just a last, long breath that melted into the stillness of their home. Liam held her wrapped in his favorite blanket, tears soaking through the fabric. Paul sat beside him, one arm around his shoulders. No one spoke. The silence was sacred, filled not with grief, but reverence, a goodbye that didn't need words. They buried her under the maple tree in the yard, the one where spring always arrived first. Liam placed a painted stone on the soil. She cried for me. And I heard her. Paul added another. She stayed. So I stayed. The wind moved gently through the branches, as if affirming the truth of it. And for the first time since she'd arrived, the house felt complete even in loss. Later that week, a letter arrived from a boy in another town who had read about Whiskers. I was going to run away, it said. But then I read about the cat who didn't leave, so I stayed. I told someone. And now I'm safe. Paul folded the letter slowly, placing it inside Liam's journal. Her voice keeps going, he said. Liam smiled, tired but proud. It was always bigger than us. Spring returned in full, softening the ground around Whiskers' grave beneath the old maple. Flowers had started blooming there on their own little wild clusters of violet and white, like nature's way of saying thank you. Paul and Liam sat on the bench they had built together, the one with her name carved into the side. Most mornings, they began their day there. No words. Just coffee, juice, and the quiet certainty that something sacred had passed through their lives and left a mark. Liam had changed. There was still softness in him, but now it was held by strength. He laughed more. His shoulders sat a little higher. He walked like someone who knew where home was. He had even begun to talk about the future, about maybe becoming a vet, or a writer, or someone who listens for quiet cries. Paul encouraged every dream. Whatever you become, he told him, let it be something that stays. One afternoon, while cleaning the attic, they found Irene's old photo albums. Liam flipped through each page like it held treasure. She smiled a lot, he said. But her eyes look like yours, Paul chuckled. She used to say we were both too serious for our own good. Liam grinned. I think Whiskers would have liked her. Paul nodded, feeling the warmth in his chest. She would have. And Irene would have loved you. They decided to foster again carefully, intentionally. First a timid calico kitten found behind the school dumpsters. Then a dog, blind in one eye but full of affection. Each animal came and went, but none stayed forever. Liam understood this now. Some come to rest, he said once. some come to move on. But all of them changed something. Paul marveled at the boy's wisdom. Grief had not hardened him, it had sharpened his ability to love. The local shelter invited them to lead a community program pairing rescued animals with children in temporary foster care. They called it Whiskers Way. Paul had doubts at first. "I'm not good at organizing," he said. But Liam reminded him, "You're good at showing up." So they showed up, week after week, and the room began to fill with nervous laughter, cautious touches, and little hearts learning to trust again. Just like Whiskers taught them, the school invited them back for another assembly. This time, Liam led the presentation. He brought his journal and read a few pages aloud. The entry about the first time Whiskers licked his hand, the day she let Paul pick her up, and the night she passed. "I used to think you needed to be loud to be saved," he said. "But now I know. One whisper can change everything." The auditorium fell silent. Then erupted in applause. Paul stood at the back, hands in his pockets, heart full. A small publisher reached out after hearing about Whiskers Way. They asked Paul and Liam if they'd write their story together. Not just what happened, the editor said, but what it meant. Paul wasn't sure. But Liam was. "If it helps someone else hear their cry," he said, "we have to." So they began. Each evening, after dinner, they'd write a few pages, Paul on the old typewriter, Liam dictating from the floor. Memory became message, pain became purpose. They returned to the mill one final time that summer. Not to mourn but to honor. Paul brought white flowers. Liam placed a small ceramic figure of Whiskers near the door. They stood there quietly, the building still crumbling but no longer empty. "Do you ever wonder why she cried that night?" Liam asked. Paul nodded. "Because she knew someone had to hear. And maybe she knew I needed to listen." Liam took his hand. "She cried for both of us." Paul squeezed his fingers. "And we answered." The town council voted to repurpose the mill ruins as a memorial garden. With Paul and Liam's blessing, they included a plaque in memory of those who cried quietly and those who finally listened. Below it, etched in brass, Whiskers, guardian, guide, grace. Paul stood in front of it on the day of the dedication, tears in his eyes. Not from grief but from the sheer, overwhelming beauty of what that cat had left behind. Liam turned 12 that fall. They celebrated with a picnic under the maple tree. Friends, neighbors, and even some of the children from the Whiskers Way program came. Someone brought balloons, another brought homemade cupcakes. Paul watched Liam laugh, surrounded by joy he never thought he'd live to see again. "You gave him a life," a neighbor whispered to Paul, but Paul shook his head gently. "He gave me mine back." That night, as stars blinked above their home, Paul stood alone on the porch. The wind was gentle, brushing through the wind chimes like a familiar voice. He closed his eyes and imagined Whiskers walking along the railing, tail high, eyes half-lidded with knowing. "You did good, girl," he whispered. "You didn't just save a child. You woke up a man." Liam's book was published the following spring. Just a small print run through the local press, 50 copies, each bound with care, illustrated with his own drawings. He titled it Whiskers Waited. The dedication read, "To the one who cried, and to the one who heard." They donated copies to libraries, shelters, and foster care centers across the state. Within weeks, letters came from children, teachers, and caseworkers who saw in the pages something they hadn't known they needed: permission to hope. Paul was invited to speak at a state conference for child welfare volunteers. Standing at a podium before hundreds of strangers, he held nothing but a photo of Whiskers and a copy of the journal Liam once kept. "I used to think you had to be strong to help someone," he told them. "But sometimes, all it takes is listening when it's inconvenient, when it's uncomfortable, when it's quiet." A child didn't scream, a cat did. And because of that, everything changed. They started a small foundation with the proceeds from the book, Whiskers Heard. Its mission was simple: train volunteers to recognize subtle signs of distress in children and animals, and respond with presence, not pity. Paul worked closely with local agencies. Liam helped create video materials. "Just because they're quiet," he said in one, "doesn't mean they're okay. Crying isn't always loud." Thousands viewed the content. Dozens signed up. Change, it seemed, was starting to echo. In the evenings, life slowed again. Paul cooked while Liam set the table. They adopted another rescue cat, this one a quiet gray tabby named Junebug. She's not Whiskers, Liam said, but she's someone new who needs to stay, Paul agreed. The house felt full, not crowded, but content, as if every corner had been swept by healing. The silence between them no longer carried ache, it carried understanding. One night, as they watched fireflies from the porch, Liam leaned into Paul's side. "Do you think Whiskers knew what she was doing?" Paul smiled. "I think she knew more than either of us. She didn't just find you. She brought you somewhere you could grow." Liam nodded. "And she brought you back." Paul looked at the sky. "She didn't just save us, she stitched us together." At school, Liam began mentoring younger students, especially those who struggled to speak up. One counselor remarked, "He sees what others miss. It's like he has a sixth sense." Paul wasn't surprised. He knew what it meant to walk through fire and come out softer, not harder. To be wounded and still choose compassion. Whiskers had taught them both that survival was only the beginning. Connection was the real gift. Paul continued to write. Short essays, letters to no one. Pieces of thought wrapped in memory. Some were published. Others he kept for Liam to find later. One he taped to the back of a picture frame read, "You are the boy I never knew I was waiting for." Liam found it a year later and cried. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of being wanted. The maple tree where Whiskers was buried bloomed brighter than ever. It had become a landmark in town. Children left toys there. Visitors left small notes and drawings. Someone once painted a stone that read, "Because you stayed, I stayed too." Paul read it often. Sometimes he'd sit on the bench, eyes closed, and feel her presence not in grief, but in gratitude. Years passed. Liam grew taller, his voice deepened, but he never forgot. Each anniversary of the night Paul heard that cry, they'd light a single candle by the front door. Not for mourning, Liam once said, for remembering. And they'd sit together, in the same quiet that once scared them, now filled with peace. The cat had long stopped crying, because someone had answered. On Paul's 70th birthday, Liam gave him a framed photograph, the three of them, Paul, Liam, and Whiskers on the front porch, arms and paws intertwined. Below it, he wrote, "You didn't just hear her. You heard me." Paul, eyes misty, placed it beside Irene's photo. "Now we're all here," he said, and he meant it. The story was eventually adapted into a short film. Nothing flashy, just honest. Viewers wrote in from around the world. "I adopted after watching this. I forgave someone. I listened more." The film ended with a simple phrase on screen. "She cried." He answered, "And a family was born." Paul didn't live forever. But when he passed, peacefully, years later, he did so in the home he rebuilt from grief. Liam, now a young man, carried him in memory. On Paul's gravestone were just a few words, chosen by Liam himself. He didn't just save a cat, he found himself. And under it, etched in small letters, Whiskers waited. And he came.